So I just finished writing my shareholder letter, and I figured I would walk you guys through it so that you can learn how well my startup's done to date, so our financials and our numbers, and then 2, walk you guys through the biggest risks that our company currently faces right now that if we don't solve it, we could go under. And then through all of that, then look in the greater context of how close are we to hitting our goal of reaching a $1 billion company. So let's dive in. So pulling up our shareholder letter here, I would actually argue that there are 2 main components to a really good shareholder letter. The first one being telling a high-level story and vision that inspires people. And then 2, backing that up with the nitty-gritty data that actually supports that story. And so what you actually see me do to kick things off in our shareholder letter is actually just to reminisce on the good old days of how we started to give context on where we are today, where I talk about how when I first started Stan, it was just me filming TikToks alone in my dorm room, making content myself, trying to figure out how to monetize, and then lo and behold, looking back 3 years later, having an entire business with a team of 20 and all of this progress so far. And so this context and this story that I lay out for folks then tees me up to dive right into the numbers, AKA the moment you've been waiting for, our financials. All right, let's put this bad boy on. So if you look here at our annual recurring revenue, we grew an insane amount this year, where we started this year at $1.7 million in annual recurring revenue, and we just ended the year at $14.7 million in annual recurring revenue, which is an 8.1x in just a year, which is wild to me because at the start of this year, we were literally fighting for our lives because the market had collapsed and our growth at the time had completely flatlined. And so what I actually spend this entire shareholder letter talking through, and hopefully you'll get to learn from, is how did we go from flatlining as a business to then accelerating to grow 470% year over year, then 810% year over year, quarter after quarter after quarter. Like, how did we re-accelerate our business? And I actually do this in the shareholder letter by going through all of my favorite accomplishments for the year, where the first favorite accomplishment I have is actually talking through how we broke through this growth plateau. So in this first section here, I paint that context for our shareholders. And I even include this photo of me being super stressed out during our January all hands, where we were just like, missing target, we need to survive. And setting this context now allows me to dive into the reason why we grew this year, where the key insight to Stan, like how our business has grown so well, is because of a super simple insight that we have, which is that our customers, our creators, are our best salespeople. Like, it's one thing for us to run paid ads and spend a lot of money getting the word out about Stan, but it's another thing for all of our customers, our thousands of creators who are the world's best marketers out there, preaching organically the merits of our product and how much we've changed their lives. Sorry, I'm midway through filming this and I realize I'm still wearing this tie, so I'm actually gonna take this off because it's ridiculous. I quit finance for a reason. Anyways, back to the letter here. So I lay out this insight with a really simple diagram, which is basically Stan's master strategy. And you'll note here that it's actually really, really simple, which is just to delight your customers. And if you do such a good job delighting your customers, they'll actually just refer new customers. And despite how obvious this strategy might seem, like it's so simple, right? But what I see the mistake often we all make in business is like, oh my gosh, you need to create some master plan with this complex strategy and competitive advantage and this buzzword and network effects and this crazy complicated thing. But what I've learned in life is that the simple things almost always win. They're just incredibly difficult to execute on. But the tension point here in our shareholder letter is that we already knew that strategy in January when we were struggling to grow. And that actually leads us to one of my favorite achievements we had from this year that I go through, which is actually us learning what it means to scale. And so our strategy was right. We just weren't thinking about how to apply that strategy correctly. And I know that sounds abstract, but if you think about our revenue chart here and what changed, you'll actually see that we were mostly muddling along for a while. And then there was a certain point where we just took off and flew through the roof. And the only difference between those 2 moments was just a difference in mentalities. What do I mean by that? Basically, when I first started Stan, I really just had this mental model of like, I'm gonna push this rock up the hill. Like, it was just like sheer grit and persistence and just like powering through all the no's and the go's. And that mental mindset of like just wheeling something into the world, I think is really critical for that stage. But at some point, it's such a one player mode mentality that as you go along this revenue curve, as your number gets larger and larger, when you go from 0 to $1 million in revenue, it works. But then in order to make enough impact at, let's say, the 2 million mark, You have to push such a large boulder in order to make any numbers move meaningfully that mentality actually limits your ability to evolve into the next mindset and mentality you need to scale your business to the next level. And so basically, when you look at this point on the graph, our mentality shifted from I need to crank and do everything myself manually to how do I build a system that makes money for me in my sleep? And so the number one change that you see here is us implementing systems that actually scale us as human beings. So for example, implementing an automated sales funnel versus me taking every single sales call manually back in the day, or building self-serve courses that our customers can actually consume anytime versus onboarding every single customer manually like I did back in the day. And then lastly, learning how to hire and train amazing people, because no matter how good you might be as a single person, you can't outwork 10 or 20 people. So the next part of this letter is actually the section that I'm most proud of because it talks about our purpose as an organization. And that specifically is our values. And at first you're gonna be like, John, be quiet, that's just like a bunch of corporate woo-woo BS. But I want you to think about the most successful companies in the world, like the brands that you respect the most out there. So companies like Patagonia, Red Bull, or even Chick-fil-A. These are companies that stand for something. Like, love them or hate them, they are super proud and intentional of who they are and how they present themselves in the world, and they are rewarded for that. And so for us here at Stan, we are super clear that one of the main reasons for our success as a company is because of our values. Like, I started this company with the mantra that if you just go out there and you give, like you just give good energy to this world and you try to help other people, you will help yourself tenfold. But the key here, of course, is you have to thread the needle. You can't just be like all woo-woo-y, like, oh, like flowers and daisies and being like good, kind people. Like, you have to do that and then also thread it with really data-driven execution. And this, I think, is the insight of our values here at Stan, is we actually think about our values within the context of a human brain. Where if you think about a really successful person or a really successful creator entrepreneur, they're strong on both their right side of their brain, aka their creative side of their brain, their emotionally intuitive side of their brain, as well as their left side of their brain, which is their logical brain. And so the mentality of how we think about success here at Stan is by finding that beautiful balance, that tension between both your left brain and your right brain, because that's how you take a incredible creative vision and innovate, and then you actually execute and build upon that and drive results. And so my favorite example that I actually give in this letter is actually how our support team, our customer support team, actually drives sales for us because of our values. Specifically, I just want you guys to see some of the responses that my support team gets. They're incredible what they do. I love them so much. They're such a joy in people's days. But like, look at some of these messages. Like, we even had someone the other day respond and say like, if I could marry you, I literally would. And so when you think about this value or this intention of being kind to this world and serving people with delight, it's like, oh, that's a nice thing. But let's tie this now back to business results. Because when you have great customer support, that leads to incredible customer reviews, AKA just popping up some of our Trustpilot reviews here. All of your customers, once again, pointing back to our flywheel, start referring new customers because they have such a wonderful experience with you. Because you treat them like a real human being. Now, of course, none of that actually matters if you don't have a great product, because no one's gonna buy anything from you at scale if you're just a good person. You also have to have an incredible product that people really need that helps them in their life somehow. And so I'm really proud of our engineering team and how hard they worked this year to ship an incredible product. Like, here at Sin, we think about product as this craft, like we're artisans in our workshop, like building beautiful technology that's like simple to use and just like has that click to it, that satisfying feeling. And so this year we shipped a ton of stuff, including email marketing, which now saves our customers thousands of dollars versus using legacy solutions like MailChimp, which are egregiously overpriced. I will call them out on that. Number two, we also got on the AI hype train like everyone else, but we actually made sure that we were genuinely differentiated in this, where our AI assistant, Stanley, he can actually scrape your social media account. So watch all of your content and understand your voice and learn your knowledge, and then help you either make new content, so help you script in your voice and your style, or help you create digital products that you can actually monetize. So not just another ChatGPT bot. And then lastly, we shipped the beta version of our community feature, which I'm really excited to iterate on this coming year, because this is now going to allow us to provide all of our creators with a place where they can actually own their audience rather than always having to be at the whims of some algorithm for your audience to actually see your stuff. You can actually just build your own community and build your own world where people can come interact and chat. And so the reason why I'm actually super excited about all these product updates is because they're the final cornerstones of us building into our grander product vision of just building an all-in-one creator store for our creators so that no longer do they have to patch together 17 different software subscriptions. Instead, they can just run their entire business and everything they need within Stan. But of course, none of this matters if we don't solve our biggest existential risk, which is churn. Spooky. Okay, so maybe it's not that bad, but I want you to think about the implications if we don't figure out our churn. Where right now, our monthly churn rate is around 13% every single month. So that means we're losing 13% of our customers every single month. They're canceling their subscription, which hasn't been a problem so far because if you think about our revenue, it's growing so quickly. We're having so many new people sign up. But law of large numbers, everything that goes up must come down. At some point, our growth is going to start to decelerate. And if our growth slows down enough, our churn actually will start to eat into our growth in a way where we'll either start to flatline or actually start decreasing in revenue. So if we want to build a sustainable long-term business, we have to figure out our churn. And so in the shareholder letter, I walk our shareholders through our game plan and our strategy to actually increase our retention over time. And it's actually to think about churn and retention in a slightly different way. And it's to reframe our thinking from a gross retention basis to a net revenue retention basis. So what do I mean by that with these business buzzwords? Basically, if you think about any product that serves small business owners like we do, their rate of decay of losing entrepreneurs over time is actually pretty high because entrepreneurship is really, really difficult. And so when you look at a large business like Shopify, for example, they have billions of dollars of revenue. And in that, if you look at their cohort curves, they actually realize that most of the folks that subscribe to them initially are gonna churn off because maybe they're not gonna wanna do the store anymore, or maybe they're not gonna make it. But they know that of that cohort, some small percentage of folks are gonna be the next Allbirds or the next Kylie Cosmetics. And that is actually how on a revenue basis, rather than a customer count basis, they actually make more per cohort over time. Specifically, if you think about some of the most successful brands that have started on Shopify, so a Figs or an Allbirds, they're generating billions of dollars of transaction volume. And Shopify not only takes the subscription revenue from every customer, but it also participates in the payments revenue of that customer over time. So when you have a mega customer come in, that customer ends up generating you so much more revenue than a single customer might on average. And so in terms of how we want to solve our retention issue, we want to make sure that for anyone who comes in who is hell-bent on success as a creator entrepreneur, we are going to do everything we can to help them be successful and then maximize their income on Stan because it creates a best of both worlds where their success is our success. But if we want to get there, then we still have to solve a really large structural issue with the creator economy that I think no one talks about, and I actually call the creator economy's dirty little secret. And it's that creator businesses are still pretty bad businesses. Because I want you to think about creator businesses for a second here, where if you take someone like Mr. Beast and his now defunct Mr. Beast Burger, you realize that the success of the business is actually limited to the success and the output of the underlying personality. AKA, a single human can only do so much, right? You can only reach so many people and resonate with so many people before you tap out. Whereas with a brand like Allbirds, you can hire an entire marketing team to canvas all these different marketing channels and all these different audiences and continue to expand your sales beyond your initial audience. And so what you see is this really interesting double-edged sword where the very reason why a creator business is successful in the first place, which is a connection to a single human personality, actually leads it to its greatest weakness, which is its inability to scale beyond the creator themselves. And so think if we were able to solve this. Like think about just how many people we could empower to start their own business if we could figure out how to scale a creator business in the same way that one would scale a legacy business. And so in our shareholder letter, I actually lay out a few creators who've been able to figure out how to launch a brand and scale it well beyond themselves. Earlier, I mentioned Mr. Beast Burger, which he's now shut down in favor of launching a larger brand called Feastables. Note it's called Feastables and not Mr. Beast Chocolate, that he's actually grown to a $100 million plus revenue business in just its first year. And even more impressively, Logan Paul and KSI, despite their polarization, have launched Prime over the last few years and dominated Gatorade to the point where now the Prime brand has generated over $1 billion plus in revenue in just 2023 alone. Like, two creators figured out how to build a brand that first they hacked distribution with their personalities, but is now scaled to much larger than just them. And then lastly, one of my favorites recently has actually been Tessa Barden, who launched her own photo editing app as a lifestyle influencer. And she's actually bootstrapped it from zero to $32 million in annual recurring revenue just off of her distribution alone. But here's the thing that gets me most excited about this trend. Is that it's not just limited to these top 1% creators who can afford a budget of millions of dollars on production and hire staff of hundreds of people. It's actually happening across the creator economy. Because here at Stan, we have always been super intentional about serving a demographic that we proudly call the middle class creator. We're talking everyday, normal, hardworking people who just want to build their own business and create financial independence for themselves and their family. And we're seeing these creators succeed in droves. And in the shareholder letter, I actually give the example of one of our customers, Abigail Pugh, and I want to share her story with you because it's just so incredibly inspiring. But basically, just a year and a half ago, Abigail's husband actually lost his job due to a stroke, and he was completely unable to work. And Abigail actually, as a stay-at-home mom with a 2-year-old daughter, was like, shoot, like, I gotta figure out some way to make money for us or else we're literally gonna starve. And so she full sends it and starts posting content and building an audience for herself. And then she starts using Stan to actually build her own business, to sell digital products, to book clients. And what do you know, a year and a half later, we were actually knocking at Abigail's door, surprising her for making her first $1 million. And it's not just Abigail as a success story, because what gives me so much energy here at Stan, what like truly fires up the team, is when we see Stan working for all of these random individuals around the world pursuing their passions. Like, we're talking about people who just love baking bread and make content on that, or love gardening, or give dating advice, or give fitness advice. Like, there's so many people out there who have some sort of passion or some sort of knowledge that they can share with the world, and they're making content about it, and then literally making life-changing amounts of money with that through Stan. And so what gets me so fired up about Stan and the future vision that I paint within this shareholder letter is, if you think about it, the entire economy is actually shifting to move online. Everyone is realizing that social media is the way to acquire customers, the way to have your own organic distribution channel without having to move around the legacy incumbents and pay tons of money for advertising. Like, creators are actually just the first kinds of entrepreneurs who are waking up to the reality that you yourself, no matter who you are, no matter what you look like, no matter where you come from, if you work hard and you give value, you can build distribution for yourself in whatever you want to sell. And so to call all of this back to that churn problem we mentioned before, that success problem, this curve, this retention curve of people that end up being successful, our mission here at Stan, what gets us super fired up, is actually to push that curve up. And so now that we've covered the letter, let's talk about how close we are to building a $1 billion company. So let's talk about how far we've gotten over the last 2 years as you follow the journey, where I first started ideating on Stan of how can I help other creators while I was still in business school. And then by the time I dropped out, we were in this 0 to 1 phase, the product market fit phase, where you ship your product out to the market, you get a bunch of feedback, and you try to make that better for customers over time. And I would actually say this is where we ended the year prior at 1.7 million in ARR, where people were kind of using Stan and liking it, but we just weren't operating at the scale we needed to become a real company. And so when you think about this year and all the growth we've seen, I would actually argue we are right here in the scaling stage. And so when you think about what it's going to take to go from just figuring out how to scale a company to actually building a $100 million plus revenue business, which is what's required if you're growing profitably to become a multi-billion dollar company, think about all the things we still need to learn how to do. And so over the next few years, you're gonna see whether or not we have what it takes to go from scaling into success.